as we move to our first news item of the show, actually involves a player on a team that sort of had a similar taking the league by surprise with how they played, at least to start the year, in the Memphis Grizzlies. Zach Edey
Yeah.
was announced that he underwent surgery to stabilize his ankle following an injury that happened in off-season practice. The next day, we found out that Darius Garland from the Cleveland Cavaliers, who also completely transformed how they were playing this season, not that these injuries are at all related to that, he had to undergo surgery to repair a, quote, great toe injury. Hurt his big toe. Really important for balance in case anybody has ever not injured their big toe. He's going to be sidelined for 4 to 5 months after that.
Yeah.
And Zach Edey is also expected to miss the beginning of the season as well. Do you think that either of these injuries change the offseason calculus for either the Grizzlies or the Cavs?
If anything, it probably should confirm what the Grizzlies should be doing, and that is probably tearing down a lot of that roster. I don't know if Edey will be. Well, I don't think he was intended to be a big part of it, but it's just another brick in the wall on that, you know.
So the story with Edey is really interesting because obviously when a head coach gets fired mid-season, there's always a lot of aftermath articles and think pieces written to sort of craft the narrative around what was the problem, what is going to be the solution in the future, and it was a bit muddled because it was like, well, the front office brought in these offensive coordinators that changed the offense, but also Ja didn't like that offense, but Taylor Jenkins sort of took the blame for that. And also Zach Edey doesn't really fit into the way that the offense changed. So they decided to go with this other offensive coordinator who they hired at the same time to change the offense back to what it was with a lot of pick and roll, but make it better. So I don't actually know what it was that they were already planning on doing, but it seemed like at the end of all of that was swirling around, one of the conclusions was Zach Edey needs to be a bigger part of what we're doing. And I just feel like this puts a wrench in those plans.
Well, there was a lot of decisions made largely by the general manager. I think Taylor Jenkins is a good coach. And he has a great reputation in the league, and it's hard to determine which decisions were him and which ones were the GMs. But I'll say that I think that their roster right now, it's just, I don't know if they're good enough. They're good, and they hit their peak in 2023, 2022, and I think what you've seen since, obviously with Jaws issues, has been just kind of a tailing off to a back end of the playoffs kind of team. Obviously, Jaw's continued injuries are not helping. But I think that they have got to find out if they're going to build around Jaw. And if they're going to do that, they have to say, okay, is Jaw going to have the ball in his hands? And if he's going to have the ball in his hands, we need to have shooters. We need to have floor spacers. And we need to, and then if you're going to have eventually Zach Edey out there, have him camp out in the middle like Brook Lopez, or, he's not going to shoot threes like Brook Lopez, but, have him, camp out there.
He's the new Steven Adams.
Yes, and be Steven Adams, which they already had Steven Adams on that team, which is, one of the many things that Memphis has done in the last couple of years. And I'm like, you had the guy if you wanted to do this kind of offense. But it is going to be interesting to watch because they already got rid of Marcus Smart. They have other pieces they can move, like Desmond Bane, if they really want to retool this roster. And the shooter, what's his name? Oh my God, Luke Kennard. I was going to say Kyle Korver.
I think he's actually a free agent this summer. He's been on a couple of people's list of targets for the Nuggets that I've seen.
Nuggets, yeah. So I mean, it's just like I think this is a good time for them to adjust their expectations and maybe take a different look at what they can do with that roster.
Yeah, HM says they also have to worry about the Jaren extension. They do have a lot of decisions to make this offseason, and I'm, very curious what direction they go. A lot of these decisions are going to be made by a general manager, and that very important position for determining not just the personnel of your roster, but the direction of your team and your organization. And so our next news item that will actually also take us into our first segment on the Denver Nuggets is about the Atlanta Hawks, who just hired a senior vice president of basketball operations and a senior vice president of basketball analytics. Their general manager is Ansi Saleh, who was actually hired on April 21st. He was interim GM for a while after they fired Landry Fields. Pretty soon, I think they fired Landry right after they got eliminated from the play-in, and then they hired Ansi as the permanent guy a couple weeks later. The vice president of basketball operations is coming over from the Pelicans. He was the Pelicans general manager for a bit, for about a year after Trajan Landon went to the Pistons. Actually similar to Ben Tenzer, who we're going to talk a little bit about on this show, started as an intern with the Pelicans, and he leaves the organization after 15 years to go become the VP of basketball ops for Atlanta. And then they got their basketball analytics guy, Peter Dinwiddie, from the 76ers. This was an interesting slate of announcements because I know that Calvin Booth was actually in the running for interviews for team president. I don't know if he was also interviewing for other positions. It seemed like they had a lot of openings available. And, I was listening to Brad Rowland over on Locked On Hawks, and he basically mentioned that at this point, he'd be surprised if they hired a president to put sort of above Ansi at this point. And the fact that Calvin Booth or a different team president wasn't announced as part of this pretty wide slate of hirings, I think goes along with that. But that was just like, oh, okay, it seems like Calvin is probably not going over there. And it was just going to be interesting to see where he'd land, because obviously sometimes those relationships can, help deals get done. What was your reaction to just this wide slate of hirings being announced for Atlanta? It seems like, okay, we've got our people kind of set in place right now.
What I think is interesting is they are dedicating a lot to people under Ansi, and I think that is something the Nuggets have never done. We'll be getting to that. But I think that is a good move because you need a bigger front office. You need a wider depth of field. You need not just a scouting department now. You need not just an analytics department now, but you need coordination departments. You need a extensive staff to handle all of the intelligence, basically.
Yeah, don't the Clippers have an extensive spy network? We joke about it being a spy network, but they're people that are sent out, and their whole job is just gathering intelligence, is finding out the goings on throughout the league, that they can sort of report back and keep everybody apprised in ways that can help their various departments.
It's more extensive than most teams in the league. I put it to you that way, but they have that, and look, if you want to compete, you got to stay, at least if you're not going to stay ahead, you got to stay in line.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great thing that the Hawks decided to do for themselves, because they had Landry Fields there, and it was, I don't know how good Landry was, to be quite honest with you, but I think there was a reason he was fired.
Yeah.
But I do believe that they will have the foundation now, and hopefully they can have a longer runway. Well, now that Ansi's been there since apparently late April, hopefully they have a long runway to be able to make decisions going into the draft, which is key.
Yeah, no, I think that what you're talking about with the investment that they have under ONSI is something that Brad actually talked about, and it sort of again leads me into our story on the Nuggets. On Locked on Hawks, he's talking about how this ownership group has largely been, averse to paying luxury taxes to the league. So they're constantly trying to stay under luxury tax. Understandable given the position that the Hawks are in as a team, just like they're with respect to their competitiveness, but willing to spend money on things like brand new practice facility and, investing in this various personnel, and actually related to a comment that we just had on the screen. Willing to fork over enough cash to poach ONSI away from the Golden State Warriors in the first place. And that stands in contrast to everything that I have heard and observed about the Denver Nuggets. Now, look, they have been in the luxury tax. Like, they're in the luxury tax. They are a competitive enough team, and they haven't tried to avoid the luxury tax in particular, although they have avoided the second apron. That comes with its own other set of concerns, but not so much willing to invest in other parts of the organization, at least monetarily speaking. And one of the I think probably the biggest, most recent example of that is in general manager. But while you're here, why don't you tell the people where they can find you and your work before you go?
You can find me on Twitter at jmorton78. I'm on Blue Sky at jmorton78, at Blue Sky, blah, blah, blah. I am at Denver Stiffs occasionally with my writing. I don't write a ton anymore, but when I do, I tend to try to make it matter. And of course, CSG Podcast is still going strong 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So look it up, CSG Podcast, and with Jeff Morton. And
awesome.
There I am.
I know Jeff told us that he's winging these shows, but I would have no idea. I thought these were really extensively planned monologues. Every episode is great. You guys should definitely check it out.